It was a sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but the peace didn't last long. Officer Blake, a seasoned cop with a reputation for being rough around the edges, arrived on the scene after a call reported suspicious activity at the park. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a little black girl sitting alone on a bench, holding a backpack tightly against her chest. Something about her seemed out of place, or so he thought. Ignoring her fearful expression, Officer Blake approached, his voice stern and unyielding. He accused her of theft without evidence, convinced she was up to no good. Passers-by watched in shock as he questioned her harshly and eventually handcuffed her, treating her not like a child, but as a criminal. The little girl, no older than 9, was trembling and refused to speak, only pleading with her tear-filled eyes. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Whispers spread about how quickly the officer had jumped to conclusions. But as Officer Blake prepared to book the young girl at the station, the unexpected happened. Her parents arrived, clearly distressed and unwilling to stay silent. The moment they stepped into the room, everything changed. With a composed but intense demeanor, her mother revealed something about their family that no one, least of all Officer Blake, could have anticipated. A detail that would unravel his assumptions and leave him grappling with a gut-wrenching regret. What secret could be so powerful that it forced a man like Officer Blake to confront his biases and question everything he believed about himself? Stay tuned to uncover the truth in this eye-opening story that will change the way you look at justice, prejudice, and the strength of family. The room fell silent as Officer Blake stood face to face with the little girl's parents. Her mother, a striking woman with calm yet piercing eyes, placed a firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. Her father stood beside her, his imposing presence filling the space. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like time had slowed down. Blake crossed his arms, still unwilling to admit any wrongdoing. "If you have something to say, now's the time," he muttered, his voice laced with skepticism. The mother took a deep breath, holding back the emotions swelling in her chest. "You see this little girl," she began, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "She's more than what you assume, but you didn't even stop to ask her name before treating her like a criminal." Her words stung, but Blake kept his stern demeanor. He glanced at the girl, who was still clutching her backpack tightly, avoiding eye contact. "So tell me," he said impatiently, "what's this big secret you're talking about?" The father stepped forward, his voice deep but calm. "Our family has roots in this community, a history that goes deeper than you'd care to understand. Do you recognize the name Dr. Amelia Carter?" Blake frowned, the name tugging at a distant memory he couldn't quite place. Dr. Carter dedicated her life to this city, and her work shaped the very place you call home. Blake's confidence began to falter. The name sounded familiar, and a faint discomfort crept in. "What does that have to do with any of this?" he asked, his tone now less commanding. The mother leaned in slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Everything," she said quietly, "because Amelia Carter is this little girl's grandmother." The revelation hung in the air, leaving Officer Blake, and everyone watching, speechless. Officer Blake shifted uneasily as the weight of the mother's words sank in. Dr. Amelia Carter, a name he had heard years ago during a local awards ceremony for civil rights leaders. She had been celebrated for her groundbreaking work in creating after-school programs for underprivileged kids, initiatives that had reduced crime rates and brought communities closer. But the image of this family connected to that legacy didn't align with the assumptions Blake had made only moments before. His authority felt smaller under their steady gazes. The little girl finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I was only waiting for my mom," she whispered. "The backpack has books and snacks for the reading circle I help with at the park." Her words were simple, yet they carried the innocence of a child and the proof that Blake had been wrong. Blake clenched his jaw, the sharp pang of regret creeping into his chest. But instead of acknowledging it, he deflected. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" he asked, his tone defensive. The father's eyes darkened. Why should a 9-year-old have to explain herself to avoid being treated like a threat? Other officers in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances. The tension had shifted. Now it was Blake under the spotlight. As he looked at the girl and her parents, he felt a deeper sense of unease, a realization that this wasn't just about one mistake, but part of something much bigger. Yet, Blake wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. The air in the room grew heavier as the little girl's mother stepped closer to Officer Blake, her voice low but firm. "Do you know how many families in this community have faced what you just put my daughter through? How often they're treated as suspects instead of human beings? You might not think twice about it, but we live with it every day." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His mind was racing, not with answers but with flashes of other encounters, moments he had written off as routine stops, actions justified in the name of duty. Yet, this time, he couldn't shake the weight of their words or the little girl's teary eyes. Before he could regain control of the conversation, the father interrupted his thoughts. "What you don't see," he began, his tone laced with controlled anger, "is the damage you've done today. You didn't just handcuff my daughter. You took away her sense of safety, something no child should lose." The room fell silent once again, the tension now a palpable force. Blake felt his defenses unraveling, but his pride fought back, unwilling to show weakness. Meanwhile, the mother reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of the little girl with her grandmother, Dr. Amelia Carter, standing in front of a mural at the community center. A mural of unity and hope that Blake himself had passed hundreds of times without notice. "I suggest," the mother said, her voice sharp and unyielding, "you take a closer look at what you stand for before you hurt someone else." Officer Blake stared at the photo, his resolve weakening as memories surfaced. The mural of unity and hope wasn't just a decoration. It was a cornerstone of the neighborhood, a symbol he'd overlooked every day. But before he could respond, the door to the station opened, and an older man stepped inside. His sharp suit and commanding presence immediately turned heads. He carried an air of authority, but his eyes, stern and focused, spoke volumes. The man walked directly toward the family, nodding slightly at the girl's parents before turning to Blake. "Detective Moore," he introduced himself, his voice calm but powerful. "I was called about this situation." His badge gleamed in the fluorescent light, a detail that didn't go unnoticed. Blake's stomach dropped. "A detective from Internal Affairs." Before Blake could speak, Detective Moore held up his hand. "Don't bother," he said curtly. "This isn't your first complaint, is it? But this time, you've crossed a line." The little girl's father chimed in, his voice steady but resolute. "We didn't ask for special treatment. We're here because what happened to our daughter shouldn't happen to anyone." Moore fixed Blake with a hard stare. Dr. Amelia Carter was an invaluable ally in cleaning up this community. Her legacy helped build programs to protect kids like this one from becoming statistics. Yet, here we are. Blake felt the ground beneath him shift. His judgment had brought him face to face with consequences he hadn't seen coming. And they weren't done yet. The room was suffocatingly silent as Detective Moore folded his arms and leaned closer to Blake, his tone growing sharper. "Officer Blake, this isn't just about bad judgment. This is about the pattern of behavior you've shown. Today, you chose to humiliate a child, someone whose family has given so much to this city. Now it's time to own up." Blake's face flushed. For the first time, he felt genuinely cornered, not just by Moore's words, but by the weight of what he had done. He turned to the little girl, his voice breaking slightly. I was wrong," he managed to say, though the words felt insufficient. "I should have listened. I'm sorry." But as the apology hung in the air, the girl's mother stepped forward, shaking her head. "Sorry doesn't erase what she went through. You may not understand the damage you caused yet, but you will." Then came the unexpected twist. Detective Moore pulled out a sealed envelope, his gaze locked on Blake. "This wasn't just about the incident at the park," he said. An anonymous source came forward with footage of another encounter, a similar situation involving profiling and wrongful accusations. He slid the envelope across the desk. "You've been under review for weeks." Blake's heart sank. The weight of everything, the accusations, the loss of respect, and now the evidence against him, hit all at once. As the family walked out, the little girl glanced back, her expression no longer fearful but resolute, as if silently telling Blake the choice to change was his. The family stepped out into the fading light of the evening, the tension in their shoulders slowly easing. The little girl clung to her mother's hand, but glanced back at the station one last time. She didn't say anything, but her eyes told a story of resilience, a quiet determination not to let what happened define her. Her parents exchanged a glance, silently vowing to do whatever it took to protect her from facing anything like this again. Inside the station, Officer Blake slumped into his chair, the weight of Detective Moore's words and the evidence sinking in. It wasn't just the immediate fallout he feared, but what it all meant about himself, his actions, and the kind of man he'd become. The look on the little girl's face would stay with him, haunting him far longer than he cared to admit. Over the following weeks, things began to shift. The incident sparked a wave of community discussions about racial profiling and the importance of accountability. At a town meeting, the little girl's family shared their story, not out of anger, but a desire to ignite change. Her mother spoke passionately, reminding everyone that trust between the community and law enforcement could only be rebuilt through honesty and respect. Meanwhile, Blake was placed on suspension as the investigation unfolded. It forced him into an unexpected period of self-reflection. He revisited the places he'd ignored in his own neighborhood, the community center, the park, even the mural. He saw the stories those places carried, stories he'd been blind to in his years of patrolling the same streets. One afternoon, months later, Blake walked into the community center, his uniform gone, replaced by plain clothes and an uncertain expression. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he wanted to try, to understand the people he'd failed. And as he stood there, surrounded by kids laughing, learning, and thriving under the programs Dr. Amelia Carter had helped create, he realized the depth of his own ignorance. The little girl's family, now symbols of strength and hope in the neighborhood, became advocates for broader change. Their story became a rallying point, proving that even in moments of pain and injustice, there's room for growth, redemption, and a better path forward.